As a kid, I once had a nightmare. I was in a room with a window and there was someone or something outside. It was dark and powerful and it was stupid big, just enormous, and it looked into the window and it scared the shit out of me. I ran to the door through some narrow passage up the stairs and into some other room, but the monstrous face in the window was back there soon again. It probably wanted to pull me out through the window or to shake the house until I collapsed. I don't know. I woke up in cold sweat, probably screaming. After that, I dug into books, whatever I had back then on zoology, cryptozoology, paleontology, and mythical beasts, and I read it until it was clear to me that creatures that huge simply do not exist, at least not anymore. I didn't know it back then yet, but the thing I was looking for is called kaiju. Word kaiju is Japanese and it means a strange beast or a weird beast. Initially, the word didn't have any giant-sized connotations and was used to describe any generic mythological monster. In the beginning of 20th century, word kaiju got commonly used to describe early dinosaur-inspired movie monsters. And then there was Godzilla, the first official kaiju movie, and the meaning of the word got cemented since then as a monster that is really, really huge. All the other kaiju movies that followed were also Japanese. In fact, in 20 years after Godzilla, there were just 1 or 2 gap years when the new kaiju movie wasn't released in Japan. Some purists only agree to apply the word to the Japanese-born giant monsters exclusively, but I believe that the concept of kaiju is big enough to transcend cultural borders, albeit with varying degree of success. The best definition of kaiju I've ever heard is probably the one given by Red from the overly sarcastic channel. "Hey, you know it when you see it," she said, and that is very fair, and I agree with it completely. But here on Hardcore Sci-Fi channel, to answer the question, what type of fiction are kaiju, we gonna need more tangible data than eyewitness accounts, like at least the minimum size requirement. I guess when it comes to kaiju, size matters. In her first movie, Godzilla was 50 meters tall, and I propose we count that as a kaiju minimum, since kaiju generally only kept getting bigger from there on. Hey, you might say, but what about the King Kong? He surely has to be the first kaiju then, eh? Well, I actually believe there might have been some kaiju before Godzilla, but that title does not go to King Kong. However menacing they make him look these days, on his first appearance, King Kong was no higher than 8 meters. He was a giant, but not yet a kaiju. Kong had to climb a skyscraper, while Godzilla could have just destroyed it. King Kong soon reached the necessary size to fight Godzilla and became kaiju as well, but he came back to being just a giant fairly often. So what's that other kaiju that appeared before Godzilla, you might ask? Well, it's kinda not even just a separate kaiju, but a whole subspecies of them. We can roughly divide all kaiju into 3 groups, you know. The simplest ones are gigantic copies of some smaller creature. I call them gigamorph kaiju, and that's for example King Kong and Kraken, who are basically a giant gorilla and a giant squid. Then there are those that had some original prototype real-life animal, but were changed to at least some degree and sometimes in a very significant way, to accommodate for a bigger size or just for a fancier look. I call those derivant kaiju, and those would be for example Godzilla and Arakean sandworm. Unlike the first 2 types, who look at least somewhat familiar, third type of kaiju is not generally based on any known Earth species. Some parts of their anatomy might be somewhat familiar to us, but their whole structure and body plan is beyond anything that we can find on Earth, both now and in any previous era. These creatures are often alien in origin, and they are often chimeras, composites of the body parts from entirely unrelated animals, as well as they can have extra limbs or heads or other body parts. In the most extreme cases, kaiju of this group are just a chaotic blubbering mess with no general structure whatsoever. The first fictional creatures that really fit that description appeared not on screen, but on page, and I propose to call them Eldrich kaiju. Say what you want about Lovecraft, but the man has founded a new genre, on a scale comparable probably only to what Tolkien did. And well, there is one archetype that repeats a lot in Lovecraftian prose and poetry. Incredibly enormous, incomprehensible being from the other worlds, god-level omnipotent and deadly dangerous, and not just in a plain physical but in psychical way as well. Lovecraft has imagined no less than a dozen of such creatures, but the most well-known one is, of course, the Cthulhu. The Call of Cthulhu was first published in 1928, whole 5 years before the first King Kong movie. However, it was just a short story in a magazine, and Lovecraft didn't become popular until much later. Fame generally came upon him post-mortem. The footage you are watching right now was actually produced in 2005, and that was the first time Cthulhu really made it to the screens. Eldrich type of kaiju, as such, however, were there long before that, with the notorious representatives being Ghidorah and Biolante. Eldritch kaiju are probably the most popular in Western culture in the recent decades, with most new additions to the bestiary being almost exclusively Eldritch type. So, now that we have a minimum size requirement and some basic taxonomy system, it's time to poke the elephant in the room with a stick and try to answer the question: can there be kaiju? Do we have any examples at least somewhat close to that? Is it possible for any living being to reach the ultimate size of 50 meters, or maybe grow even bigger than that? The answer is yes, a lot of plants and fungi do that. Well, we are not here for the plants and fungi, you might say, and, well, fair enough. Let's have a look at the biggest active animals that we know of. Getting bigger is a viable defensive strategy, both on land and in the water. If you keep increasing in size, at some point there will be no predator big enough to threaten you. The blue whale, capable to reach almost 30 meters and up to 200 tons, is the biggest life form in our oceans, and possibly the biggest animal on the planet Earth ever, period. The current biggest animal on land is African elephant, which reaches height of almost 4 meters and weight up to 10 tons. The biggest land animal of all that have ever existed on Earth was probably some sauropod, a long-necked dinosaur which were known for their outstanding sizes. You never know when paleontologists will uncover the next biggest one, but I guess it's safe to take Argentinosaurus, whose full skeleton was never found, but the estimates from the known remains point to something around 40 meters and up to 100 tons. Even if there ever was something bigger than that, then probably not for much. Given that, it almost looks like original Kong was intentionally designed to outsize an elephant, while Godzilla was meant to outsize generally all living things on Earth ever. And Cthulhu, well, Cthulhu kinda went for overkill. So, back to the subject. What is that mysterious force that stops real-life animals from getting at least Godzilla big? Well, it is, first of all, the square cube law. Square cube law says you can't just take and resize stuff, there are some consequences. Imagine 1 cubic meter. Now let's double the length of its edges. The surface area of the cube, however, does not double, it quadruples. Volume of the cube at the same time increases the whole 8 times. Now let's try to do this with bone. Bone resistance depends on its cross-section, while its mass correlates with the volume, and if there is 8 times the mass on 4 times the resistance, you get yourself a fracture. Or let's take some muscle, which has strength proportional to cross-section. While it gets 4 times the strength, the body also becomes 8 times heavier, so muscle has to do much more work, and thus becomes much weaker, if it is able to move at all. Or maybe let's increase in size something that flies. Wing surface goes square, while volume, as well as the mass, goes cube, and behold, it cannot fly anymore, at least not before it gets some badass wing extensions. The square cube law kinda destroys any chances of Gigamorph Kaiju to ever be serious science fiction. You can't just make the monkey big, you will have to rebuild it on cellular, tissue, organ, and even organ system levels to make it work on a bigger scale, and it will inevitably end up looking very different from the original. Well, you might say, but maybe some animals could evolve sturdier bones and more efficient muscles and become big anyway? Well, the issue is, the structure of animal bodies has been perfected by the millennia of evolution by now, and is close to its natural limits anyway. The best resistance bones and the most energy-efficient muscles have been selected for by the natural selection during the geological periods of time, and the biggest animals that we know of don't really have some ultra-sturdy bones or superpower muscles. They have to use special tricks instead. Blue whales, for example, have the benefits of water. Because of Archimedes' principle, things don't weigh as much submerged in water as they do while in the air, so everything can generally grow much bigger if it stays underwater. In fact, Archimedes' force is proportional to the volume, so it actually doesn't suffer much from the square-cube law. Argentinosaurus, on the other hand, had pneumatized bones and air sacs, as birds and many dinosaurs did. In terms of physics, it's basically a battery of inbuilt air balloons along the backbone that made sauropods much lighter than they should have been for their size. Their leg bones, on the other hand, were close to the size limits of a land-based life form. There are theories that if they grew any bigger, sauropods probably wouldn't be capable of either movement or body support. Another trick of Argentinosaurus is its weight distribution. I mean, we say it's 40 meters long, but really, more than 3/4 of these 40 meters are the neck and the tail of the beast, which weighed very little. Skulls of all the sauropods were so lightweight and fragile that their fossils are considered to be some of the rarest and most valuable finds in paleontology. In fact, a skull of Argentinosaurus has not yet been found. One more important thing is, while Argentinosaurus was maybe really 40 meters long, it definitely was not 40 meters tall. Since, first of all, quite a lot of its length was the tail, and second, most of the sauropods didn't really hold their necks upright, except only for several specialized genera like brachiosaurids. The tallest of the brachiosaurids was probably Giraffatitan, who could raise his head up to 13.5 meters. There is still a discussion going on among paleontologists about whether the necks of the rest of the sauropods were held horizontally or at some intermediate angle. We have some of their neck bones, but lack the cartilage, muscle, tendons, and the air sacs. Those don't fossilize well, you know, so we don't know for sure. However, we know very well that the higher you pump the blood against the gravity and atmospheric pressure, the more powerful of a heart you need. And it's much more profitable in terms of biomechanics to just have your head closer to the heart level. The title of the tallest sauropod, for now, goes to Sauroposeidon, who, by the most optimistic estimates, could rise as high as 18 meters. And, well, that is not even the half of Kaiju minimum. So, up to 40 meters long, up to 20 meters high, and just a little bit over 100,000 tons. Is that all we can have on land? Is that the maximum? Well, maybe not. There was a study in 1986 by some Suomi scientist Jyrki Hokkanen aimed to calculate the maximum technically possible size of an animal, and it turned out to be not 100,000 but up to a whole million tons. That same study, however, points out the reason why it has probably never happened and never will. There are just no reasons for any creature to grow that big in ecological and evolutionary sense. It does not provide any sensible benefits, and the trade-offs it requires are enormous. One of the main ecological problems that giants have are their gigantic energy requirements. If you have a chunk of biomass as large as 100 or 200 tons, you gonna need a shitload of calories to keep metabolism online, and you better have some very plentiful food source nearby. Trick of the trade of the Argentinosaurus is that it does not chew, it just trims the greens with its teeth and swallows it, leaving all the digestion to the enormous bioreactor of its belly. That way, they could keep their heads busy with just one simple task most of the time: get more food. Sauropods could also save a lot of energy thanks to their necks, like find a good place, spend a couple of hours consuming all the foliage in the neck radius, and then have a short walk to the next feeding position, wasting very little energy on moving that enormous body around. If you spend life like that, eating 24/7 and saving every bit of energy, you might just get enough calories to keep going even with 100 tons. Theoretically, predators could do better here, since meat is way more nutritious than plant matter and requires less digestion. On the other hand, however, meat is much harder to get, and getting it costs a lot of energy, which means predators run at higher risk-reward ratios and can starve to death much easier. Getting big also has that unpleasant side effect of becoming weak and slow. Besides the square-cube law, there is a certain speed threshold of how fast electricity can travel through the nerves. The bigger is the distance between your brain and your limbs, the longer it takes the signals to arrive, the slower you tend to move, and the harder it becomes to catch smaller prey. Try to remember last time you tried to kill a fly, and you'll get what I mean. No wonder that the biggest land animals, both current and extinct, are giant herbivores, which don't have to chase their food much. In marine ecosystems, however, rules are different. Rooted plants can only grow close to the shores here, and they are not the main primary producers of the ecosystem. If some animal tried to grow as big as possible on a diet of just marine sessile plants, like kelp, it would probably stop around the 10-meter limit, like Stellar's sea cow did. The title of the main producer in the oceans goes instead to the phytoplankton, a menagerie of tiny free-floating algae, which in turn gets eaten by some tiny free-floating fauna, like some small crustaceans, fish or squid. The most notorious example is, of course, the krill, the main food source of the blue whales. Krill is seasonally abundant in certain areas. It tends to crowd into huge shoals, and its individual units are slow enough to be harvested in a way that foliage gets eaten on land, without wasting too much energy. Just in case of whales, it's filtering through baleen rather than lawn-mowing the canopy. Curiously, somewhat similar food source also exists on land. I'm speaking about ants and termites, which in certain areas of Africa and South America consume no less plant matter than hoofed herbivores. However, ants and termites are no match for the krill. The biggest creatures that they can support as a food base are aardvarks, sloth bears and giant anteaters, which are all not that much bigger than the average adult human. So, to sum it up, blue whale and Argentinosaurus probably demonstrate not only physical but also ecological limits of what can be technically achievable on the planet Earth. In fact, our current environment is much more unforgiving and does not permit even that. Most of the planet's ecosystems are now heavily exploited by us, humans. Argentinosaurus and blue whales evolved in the ages of abundance, when lush forests grew on land and the seas were red with krill. Our current ecological situation, on the other hand, is described by some as the sixth mass extinction, with the previous fifth one being the one that wiped out all the non-avian dinosaurs. You know, the meteorite. Age of Humans has actually started with the worldwide genocide of land-based megafauna, the species that made their stake on becoming too big to have natural predators. They were once a common sight on every continent, but now most that we have left is in Africa, where giants co-evolved with us humans from the very beginning and learned to coexist to at least some degree. Giants around the rest of the planet were naive to the dangers of the upright walking monkeys with rocks and sticks and were quickly hunted to extinction. Many paleontologists point out to climate change around the same time and suggest that maybe we humans didn't do that much damage after all. However, extinctions coincide with the appearance of human bones in fossil record quite precisely, and the climate change itself might have been at least partially caused by the extinction of megafauna. Giant animals are often cornerstone species of their biomes, like for example mammoths were for mammoth steppe, and the extinction of giants might lead to a decline of an entire biome. If that's happening around the world, that, I guess, might influence climate. But I am no paleometeorologist to speak any further on such topics. What I am trying to say is that we humans seem to be kinda counterproductive to the survival of megafauna, which makes the appearance of some kaiju behind the windows of our skyscrapers even less likely. Most of the kaiju, as they are shown in the movies, come from a species with just a single representative, which puts them on the brink of extinction already. And in the world filled with humans and their tech, chances are that real-life kaiju will go extinct long before they get to destroy New York, Hong Kong or Tokyo. Not all hope is lost though. there is one group of kaiju that might be resistant to humans, as well as they can have their ways to avoid ecological constraints and even the square cube law. I mean, of course, Eldrich type kaiju. These usually come in two flavors: genetic engineering and visitors from outer space, and sometimes they are both. Both of these origin options are not without their problems, but they are both much more plausible than the appearance of a kaiju in a process of evolution on Earth. I'd say if we rate average gigamorph kaiju as cake tier, then it's only fair to assign Eldritch kaiju at least rubber tier on average. Weak science fiction, but science fiction nevertheless. Those are, of course, just average estimates, and the final sci-fi hardness rating should be estimated for each species in personal order. That's exactly what I'm gonna do, with, for example, Godzilla, King Kong, Cthulhu, and many others. If you have any bright ideas, leave them in the comments. If you liked the video, click a like, and if you wanna see more like it, subscribe. That is scientifically proven to work. Stay hardcore, and see ya in the next video!